Start of Chapter 2. Imagine that you have a younger brother. You buy him his favorite video game. But he doesn't use it sensibly. Instead, he plays on it the all day long. He gets so engrossed in it that he forgets to eat his meals and stops studying. So, what would you do? You would make him understand by warning him at first. But if he doesn't listen, you would, of course, take the game back from him. Am I right? Kala nodded a yes. She would have done the exact same. Ugh! She had never understood what Allah said. She was now inwardly cursing herself for her oblivion. Have you ever realized that Allah never stops the very first time a person makes a mistake, but He sends us endless warnings as reminders and indications to understand? Asked Maryam. Does He indicate it in dreams? Kala replied with confusion. Maryam smiled and replied, Kala, haven't you ever heard a voice from within which admonishes you? Haven't you been claimed guilty by your own conscience? Kala felt her heart sinking rapidly now. Were these the reminders from Allah? Kala asked herself. Have you never been indirectly advised by anyone about the sins you've committed? Have you never been stopped by anyone? Asked Maryam. Oh Allah! Were those also the reminders from Allah? She was getting embarrassed by recalling all such incidences. She used to become extremely irritated when someone dared to point out her mistake and advise her. Allah gives us an ample amount of time to correct ourselves. But when we become too stubborn to change and rigidly consider it our victory, by then we would have walked right into the pit of fire as a result of that very thing, so Allah takes that blessing away from us. Maryam, you are so pleasant to talk to. Who taught you all this? She couldn't hide her admiration any longer. With a glowing smile on her face, Maryam answered, The Book of Allah. What? The Book of Allah? What was she saying? This was more shocking than what Kala could have ever imagined. A strange awkward silence prevailed for some time among the girls in the room. Then Kala spoke, Won't you ask me why I called you here? I was just wondering about that. After such an incredible meeting at hostel, why am I being privileged with this honor today? Maryam impishly replied, to which Kala broke into laughter. Her beautiful, pearly smile prompted Maryam to smile in return. Without a doubt, Kala was strikingly beautiful. Allah had really blessed her with exquisiteness. Her every movement was magically eye-catching. Seriously, I'm very embarrassed. Kala remorsefully replied as her cheeks started to blush with discomfort. She was now in a good mood due to Maryam's light-hearted attitude. Maryam. Maybe you disliked what I said, but in reality I have never been fond of religious people. They irritate me with their suffocating conversations. They keep repeating the fact of being condemned to hell, for all kinds of deeds, all the time. She stopped to judge Maryam's reaction, but she was sitting as calm as always, as if talking about religious people in this manner was not belittling. Maryam was not giving any signs of disgust or resentment. She was a girl having a personality of some deep sea, full of secrets. When she talked, it was as if a riddle had been given to you to solve. Thus in herself, she was a complete deep secret. The more you trend to explore, the more you found yourself drowned in curiosity. Kala started her conversation from where she had left. And when I treated you badly in our first meeting, but you still did not even respond rudely at my insane behavior, I was totally surprised. But honestly speaking, I was impressed too, but I did not let my emotions overcome my ego, because I never wanted to show good manners for you, as in that case I would have gone against my own self, which I didn't want. Later I found out that you did not tell any detail of that incident to Farhat. I was shocked literally, and this was the very time when I felt a little bit of soft corner develop for you in my heart. Well, it's another thing that I hid this softness in another corner of my heart. My ego came before me again. Maryam was listening to Kala with full attention. She still remembered that painful day. How could she ever forget it, how brutally she was thrown into the pits of hurt. Life already was not easy and people hurt you without any sense and reason, having no idea of how a person might be passing his life's journey while trying to keep together the pieces of his wounded soul. Every passers-by shattered them again. Maryam remembered, she had got out from there with a really broken heart. She could not hold back her flowing tears. Unintentionally, she had looked up to the sky to whisper, "Oh my Lord, in the name of your love I accept all pains." That whole day played before Miriam's eyes like a scenery. But she did not let Kala feel anything. Hiding her feelings, Miriam continued listening to Kala. "And now when I have nothing," Kala's broke off in mid-sentence and lowered her gaze, struggling to hold back her tears. Some moments passed in silence. She then renewed her courage and spoke out. "I missed you so much. I felt that you were the only person with whom I could share my grief, the one who wouldn't laugh at me like other people, rather, would understand me. And after meeting you again now, I admit that you have gotten even more value in my heart than before." On these words, Miriam recalled to herself a verse of her Lord, "And not equal are the good deed and the bad. Repel evil by that deed which is better, and thereupon the one whom between you and him is enmity as though he was a devoted friend." She had read this verse some days ago. How surprisingly her Lord was showing her the practical observation of his verses. Kala, only Allah knows when and how to enter someone in someone's life. If it were not me, then surely there would have been someone else. Your real caretaker is your Lord who placed everything in front of you with complete planning. How deeply Miriam talked, in such a young age. From where had she got this kind of depth? The more Kala was getting to know her, the more she was becoming amazed. Kala was lost in thoughts when someone knocked at the door. Miriam covered her face carefully and got up to open the door. How she easily moved here and there in that large tent, Kala was unable to understand. "If your roundtable conference is over, may I come inside?" Farhad announced smilingly, standing in the doorway. "I was feeling really uncomfortable in the cafe with the white aunties. This English language is such a punishment. If you speak too much, it seems your mouth has got curved into some really improper shape." Farhad tried to make the environment a little bit pleasant. Both girls laughed at this. Farhad's trick had really worked. She entered while holding a shopping bag. "I should go now, I'm with a patient who is admitted here." Miriam stood up, taking permission to leave. "Oh, who's that?" Now Kala understood why she had come so much early at Farhad's call. "My grandmother." For just a while, Miriam had an eye contact with Kala, and at the same moment she turned her gaze away, as if hiding her emotions. Kala had seen tears in her eyes, but she couldn't do anything for Miriam, though she wanted to. But she didn't know how to share others' grief. Kala had always led her life in carelessness, she was not competent in the use of words. Having different thoughts, Kala was trying to muster courage to speak, when Miriam went out saying greetings to both of them. "What has happened to Miriam's grandmother?" Kala asked Farhad. "She is suffering from cancer and it's in last stages," Farhad said with a heavy heart, while taking a seat near Kala. "What? Cancer?" "Yes. You know what, her parents are not alive. Her grandmother is both her mother as well as her father." Kala did not believe that the girl who was right there some time ago, helping her, talking in a peaceful manner, was herself in such great pain. How on earth was she able to be like a peaceful beach before a storm of troubles? From where did she learn such bravery? How was it possible that she did not commit suicide, seeing the load of her problems? There were many questions that Kala wanted to ask Miriam, but knew she would never be able to speak out all this to her. "Look, what I've brought for you." Farhad took out fresh juice and a cake from her shopping bag. Perhaps she wanted to keep Kala from useless thoughts, thus tried to divert her attention. "You love apple juice, right?" Farhad handed out the juice to Kala. "Now I don't like anything," thought Kala, but took the tin silently. "Who brought me here? And Bella? Where is she? Why did she not come yet?" Kala had asked many questions in a row. Farhad gazed at her with concern. Kala was looking much better after meeting Miriam. Farhad thought of telling her everything now. Maybe she could handle the situation now. After all, how much longer could the truth be kept out of her sight? The girl sitting in front of her was not an ordinary girl like others. She was Katie, who when once decided to do anything, then nobody could move her an inch from her stance. "I and Miriam brought you here, Kala." "What? But how?" "I was in the restaurant," Kala stopped before uttering another word. Perhaps some bitter senses had appeared in her mind. I and Miriam were at the medical store to buy some medicines. We saw you walking strangely alongside the road, lost in thoughts. First I thought my eyes were cheating me, maybe it was someone else, but when we got a little bit nearer, I became sure that it was you, Katie. Kala was constantly gazing at the wall in front. She did not want to disclose her sadness to Farhat. And suddenly, a car hit you. The driver escaped there and then. We immediately rushed to your help. Kala closed her eyes at this. She was feeling pain to recall that incident. There came upon many people. There was too much noise around. It was so scary, Kala, to see you lying there unconscious, soaked in blood. I was unable to move even an inch. It was Miriam who showed some strength and called for an ambulance. Someone from amongst the crowd brought from the medical store a first aid box. Miriam is trained in this. She immediately applied bandage over your wounds. Blood was everywhere. A very difficult moment that was. Farhat was about to weep recalling all of this. Tears rolled down Kala's cheeks. She turned her face in the opposite direction as she didn't want to cry in front of anyone. She had never known what tears meant, as she always used to smile like buds smile in a garden. We brought you to the hospital in ambulance. When we called Bella, she arrived there in a while. She was panicked to see you. She had also not thought that you would commit suicide. She told us that you saw Jamal in a restaurant, so you stopped the car in the middle of the road and headed straight there without thinking. And as soon you left, the traffic police officer had arrested her for parking in the wrong place. After paying a hefty fine, she was released. Kala felt embarrassed and guilty after hearing this. She had really left Bella in much trouble. When Bella got released, we had called her. She came straight here. We thought that informing your family was necessary, so we tried to get help from your phone log. You had left your phone in the car, which Bella brought here when she came. We searched your whole contact list but couldn't find any family in your contacts. It was very surprising that you had not saved any number at all. She looked at Kala, questioning. Yes, actually, I remembered them all by heart, so never saved them. Kala replied very fast with a lowered gaze so that her eyes did not convey her lie. Whatever, Katie, at least someone's number. Farhat. Please call me Kala, Kala interrupted Farhat. Farhat was shocked. Certainly, the head injury had a great impact on her. Otherwise, she wouldn't like her real name to be said, even in a joke. She got more concerned as she thought. Where is Bella? She should have been here with me. Kala had clearly seen Farhat's expressions of surprise changing into concern. She was not in the mood to answer any of Farhat's questions. Her head started aching. Kala wanted a quick solution to Bella's mystery. The absence of her best friend, in such a serious situation, was making her feel worried. Actually, Kala, you should sleep now. We can talk about this tomorrow. Dr. Peter had advised that you get proper sleep for your complete recovery. Farhat tried to sneak away from the situation. Farhat. Please, I am going crazy about it. Please, don't add to my misery, she replied as if pleading. And if I tell you that your misery will be doubled upon hearing the answer, will you still wish to know about Bella? Asked Farhat. Kala was shocked. What was she implying to now? What big bad news was still awaiting her? Was there still any other issue left to break her further? Yes, I would still like to know it, she replied with a sinking heart. If it was a mountain, let it crumble. If it was a storm, let it blow everything away. She had lost the most precious thing of hers. She had lost her life. What could any trouble snatch from her now? What could more grief do to harm her? Her boat of love had sunken so long ago. Farhat lowered her gaze. She kept thinking quietly, for some time, trying to bring out the words that were stuck in her throat. She feared Kala's reaction. God knows how she would react. It was only today that she had recovered from the coma. This news could worsen her condition. What should she do? Should she tell? Or not? Farhat was reeling in the swirl of her deep thoughts, when Kala's restless voice brought her back to the real world. Farhat! Please, tell me. Don't make me panic like this. She was nearly crying for an answer now. 1 second. Is she fine? Has anything happened to her? Her heart was sinking. She was sure of something big had happened to Bella. Why couldn't she recognize earlier? What else could be the reason behind the absence of her best friend? Kala's heart was sinking with anxiety. Farhat neither raised her head nor moved her eyes, facing Kala as she revealed the truth. Kala felt as if the ground beneath her feet had cracked and the world was sinking in. Bella and Jamal got married. Zaini, no. Kala tried to run across the lawn in an attempt to save herself. In a blink of an eye, water was poured on her, leaving her completely wet. Far away, a boisterous laugh could be heard. Wait, let me get back at you. Kala smiled and rushed towards her attacker. With a water hose in her hand, 6-year-old Zainab, still unaware of her surroundings, was laughing hysterically over the success of her mission. While she was celebrating, Kala made a surprise attack on her tiny competitor with the same pipe. Zainab was left stunned for a moment, and then a full-scale water fight ensued between both of them. At that moment, Mariam walked across the lawn, carrying the afternoon tea. She couldn't help but smile at their antics. Zainab had bonded with Kala very quickly. And Kala had gotten much better now. She remembered how Kala had almost lost the will to live 6 months ago when she heard news of Bella and Jamal's wedding. The way she had cried in front of her, Mariam could never forget it. And this thought made her sad once again. Kala had totally lost it and cried uncontrollably. The first thing she did was to call Bella. But even after repeated calls, no one picked up from the other side. Kala didn't expect that someone would pick the call. Such a big fraud. She was her best friend, wasn't she? How could she do such a thing to her? Streams of tears flowed from Kala's eyes. She couldn't stop them. She felt as if her eyes were bleeding instead of shedding tears. Oh Allah! This grief will definitely take away my life. Kala felt exhausted with the deep sorrow. With shaky hands, she quickly messaged Bella. You are an embarrassingly cheap girl. You both are the same. If you like that cheater so much, why didn't you marry him earlier? Or were you waiting to celebrate your win over my dead body? I had trusted you, Bella. Now, Kala was shaking terribly with anger and anguish. She couldn't write any further, thus sent the text just like that. And then she again started wailing uncontrollably. Kala! Please try to gather yourself. Farhat knew her pacifying words were all in vain in such grief. But what else could she have done to help? After a while, Bella replied via text, I can understand your pain. If I had been in your place, I would have thought the same. But Katie, I was helpless. I always had a crush on Jamal. I didn't have the courage to tell him. Then you came. When I saw that you two had developed a liking for each other, I moved out of your way because I don't believe in forced love. But the day you broke up with him, that other girl also left him. It was shocking news for her as well, that he was involved with you already. Anyway, Jamal told me all this after few days, when he proposed to me. Maybe he was feeling in need of someone's love. I replied saying yes, after thinking for a long time. What could I do, Katie? He was my first love. And you had already removed him from your life. I hope you will be able to understand my situation. Kala threw her cell phone at the wall, and started weeping while covering her face with her hands. At that very moment Mariam entered the room. What happened, Kala? She was out of breath. Mariam must have walked in quite quickly. She had run quickly towards Kala's apartment upon Farhat's call. Upon hearing Mariam's voice, Kala looked up and blinked away the tears. Mariam held her hands and leaned down to sit at her right side. She knows about Bella. Farhat replied to the exclamatory gaze with which Mariam had eyed her. Mariam. I don't wish to live. I wish to die. Kala was crying so gravely that she began to hiccup now. Upon observing this, Miriam herself started crying. She couldn't say anything, so she hugged her. Kala, my love, we are right here with you. Miriam's voice grew heavy with emotions. She knew explaining anything right now would be futile. It was true that people in the world had much worse stories to share. Miriam herself was living a hard life. She was a witness to daily deaths and wretched houses in her country Jammu and Kashmir. She was a witness to sexual violations of her Muslim sisters. She had seen her father drenched in blood and being tortured by the Indian army. And much more. But, while one is grieving, their grief should not be compared with someone else's sorrows. It is unwise to debate over whose grief is greater at that moment. Grief can be big or small, but it still remains as grief. It affects all equally. It pains. The heart hurts. In such a situation, one needs to embrace the other, show the love, and make that person realize that she is not alone. And that their well-being matters the most to you. And then, if it is a girl in front of you, the way of handling it is way too different. You don't explain to her. You just hold her hand first. If you listen to her sorrow with affection and show her love, consider that you have lessened her pain. But if you start advising her on the very spot, then you will have increased her grief instead. She needs explanatory solutions later, not at that very moment. Miriam. I don't have the stamina to carry on. It's as if blood is dripping from the wounds of my heart. Like someone has trodden my heart with his feet on his way to attain happiness. She was narrating her helpless condition whilst crying. Kala, you are not alone. Together, we will come out of this, inshallah. Miriam embraced grief-stricken Kala in order to lessen the burden of sorrows. Do you know how self-sufficiency is achieved? Such that you do not feel the need of anybody? Kala was inquiring Miriam with wet eyes, sitting in the lawn on a wheelchair, staring at the sunset. 3 months had passed since Bella's event, but even up to today she simply could not forget those painful moments. Miriam was not surprised by her question. Since many months now, she was observing her struggling through similar pain and restlessness. For that, you have to befriend Allah, Miriam replied. It's a walk over thorns. You have to kill your heart's desires. You have to submit your very self to Him. After all this, you achieve that level which you are inquiring about. Kala kept looking at her with awe. How do you befriend Allah? She couldn't hide her restlessness. Her eyes depicted the pain of her burning heart wounds. Miriam now replied with a smile. By loving your Lord. But beware, you should not swim over the sea of love in order to reach Him. If you want to get to Him, you have to drown yourself in that sea. Only then will you be bestowed such self-sufficiency that will bring the world to your feet. Kala was absorbing what Miriam was saying, very quietly. Miriam again initiated the conversation. Are you aware that in Quran, Allah proclaims that He is sufficient for us? Have you ever focused on this? It is such a big thing. If we had ever read it with open hearts, we would never have relied on the assistance of other people. When our Lord has clearly stated that He alone is sufficient for every problem of ours, why do we rely on people so much? We pave the way for them to hurt us. Cry before Allah. Cry as much as you wish and you will see wonders happening soon. He will wipe away your valuable tears, He will ease your pain, and will give you such strength and steadfastness that you will no longer require any support. But for that you need to trust Him. Are you aware of blind trust? You will have to jump into the fire like Prophet Ibrahim, without questioning. Then you will witness that independence which is bestowed to only a few dear ones. Miriam saw Kala's cheeks constantly being drenched with tears. A steady stream of tears was flowing from her eyes. She was silently weeping with her head lowered down. Miriam started from where she had left. In a hadith, Allah says, you just get yourself busy in the preparation for the judgment day, and I will bring the world to your feet. The world will humble itself in your service. You just keep working for the doomsday. This is the summary of that hadith. Kala. You just be closer to your Lord, you won't require anyone else. Rather, the world will run after you. And by the world, I mean the blessings of this world, which include happiness, love, dignity, pious spouse. Every nice thing you can think of comes in this criterion. A new world seemed to have opened for Kala. There was a short-cut to happiness? But this short-cut had hurdles on its way. And she was too weak. Kala felt depressed upon thinking that. You must be thinking that this all sounds too difficult, right? Miriam had read her thoughts. Kala couldn't say anything and just nodded slightly. Yes. It is difficult, but not impossible. The more valuable a thing is, the more difficult it is to achieve it. But remember one thing, nothing can defeat man, until he himself decides to get defeated. Kala was staring at her with stupor. Tears started rolling from her eyes. Then she slowly lowered her gaze. Miriam, I have accepted my defeat. To do all this, one must have the will to live. Whereas I don't wish to live anymore. This life seems like a burden to me. Like a corpse, with a dead heart. Or like a robot, which is moving around like other humans but has no life. What will you explain to such a person, who has no wish to live or fear to lose anything? I no longer have anything to do with happiness. I don't want to live, Miriam. Kala was now silently weeping with her head down. Who has bestowed you with this life? Miriam asked. Has Jamal made you? Or has Bella brought you to this world? Are these the ones who bestowed you with this beauty? What? What do you mean? She had understood Miriam's hint in that question, but wished to hear it in detail from her. Miriam's words were always inspirational. Kala. Who gave you this life? Who had thought to bring you to this world? He created the whole of mankind and animals, etc. But when it came to you, he didn't make you an animal, instead he made you a sensible human being. He especially chose you. Do you know why? Why? Asked Kala with teary eyes. Because, he wished you to recognize his affection. The Lord of the world and heavens, and of everything with it, wanted to introduce you to himself, and wished to keep you in his heaven under the shade of his affection. Hence, he made you for himself, Kala. The purpose of your life was for him. Neither for Jamal nor anyone else, but him only. But you had the wrong idea of the purpose of your life. That is why, when you felt that the reason or purpose is gone, there is no point in living anymore. Correct your purpose of life, Kala. Miriam's tone was sending strong signals to Kala's mind. Kala kept weeping silently. What had she done? Where had she wasted her life? She was repenting in her heart. And you keep saying that your heart is dead, and that you don't feel anything. There is a remedy to that as well. Miriam held her hand and assured. Really? Kala asked, with hope in her teary eyes, as she looked up to Miriam and waited for her to respond. Abdullah was numbly staring at the letter in his hands. This 3-year-old letter was very precious for him. It dated back to the time when the most beautiful period of his life started. When before him, one day I shall stand, inquired by my Lord, mighty and grand, what's with your condition, so miserable and grim? What sufferings were faced by your limbs? Where are your sparkling and deep eyes? To him I'll bow, with humble replies. I have sacrificed them for your sake. Since you were the guardian and the world was fake. The scene before him blurred with the tears in his eyes, as he whispered the poetry to himself. Forced back to the memories from the past, the scene blurred and he was now drawn into a flashback. Dad! Dad! Leave me, he is my father. 12-year-old Abdullah was crying at his father's dead body. Grieving at the brutality of the Indian army on his innocent father where he was tortured to death for no crime. He only wished to help the Kashmiris who got injured by merciless shelling and pellet guns of Indian forces at a procession, as he was a doctor, a savior of humanity. He himself was not among the stone-throwing groups. Why? Abdullah was crying and he thought to himself for what he was left with now. 2 years ago his mother and sister were raped brutally before his eyes. And now, his father too was inhumanely taken away from him. Agonized by the cruelty and inhumanity, he lunged at the Indian Army soldiers and desperately started throwing whatever he could at them. But the little child was no match before them, hence he got beaten and was arrested, and later was presented to the court after being locked up for a few days in solitary confinement. As Abdullah walked numbly to the courtroom, his eyes met an unpleasant sight, to which his little heart started trembling. It was the blood-stained body of a man known to him. His father. "Dad! Dad!" he started screaming helplessly. Abdullah tried to reach out for his father, but two policemen had gripped him strongly and dragged him back, and started heading towards the jeep. He was screaming and crying intensely. It was nothing less than a doomsday for what his eyes had to bear. Abdullah felt his heart thumbing out of his chest as his eyes blurred and he felt dizzy. He could feel the pain of his thumbing as his heart was pounding his ribs. He saw a journalist standing at some distance, as they were trying to still push him in the jeep. Abdullah screamed helplessly. "These butchers murdered my father. These brutal soldiers raped my mother and sister," were the only last words that echoed the air as he passed out and were recorded by that journalist, who had come there to collect some news. As Abdullah gained his consciousness, he found himself in jail. He was mad with pain and anguish as he could not save his mother and sister. Now his father too had gone. He was kept in custody that day until evening and then sent home. One by one the tragedies were being faced by the remaining members of the family. For 2 entire days he was not in his senses, but as soon he regained his senses, he had still not recovered from the loss. Abdullah now faced depression, loss, helplessness, brutality and inhumanity. Every other day he would be a numb observant of heated clashes between Indian forces and Kashmiri boys, stoning, shelling of tear gas and loud chants of processions. He would see it all from the window of his house, until one day when it was another gloomy morning, Abdullah rambled through the closet and pulled out a piece of cloth. He covered his face with it. It was his mother's scarf. He realized that he did not even know how to cover his face, and without informing anyone at home he left for the main crossing. Abdullah now wanted to play his active role in War of Independence. He was frustrated with the daily torture of innocent unarmed Kashmiris by Indian forces, rape of their women, accusations of having relations with Pakistan, curfews and crackdowns. As soon he reached the crossing, he saw a group of people who were together throwing stones at the criminal Indian forces. He walked closer to the group and aspired to join them. Almost everyone there had covered their faces. There were many children and teenagers as well. Nobody recognized anyone, but they were together for a common cause. They all wanted freedom from the brutal Indian occupation. Abdullah picked up some stones and aimed one at the Indian forces standing nearby. At that very moment Abdullah was reminded of an incident that had happened 2 years ago when an Indian soldier had beaten him just because he looked at him curiously. He could still recall the voice echoing in his ears. The soldier had screamed at him, "Who are you threatening with those looks?" After being reminded of those painful moments, Abdullah threw the stone in his hand with full strength at his target. Although his aim was not good enough, but it was his first step in this struggle for independence. Abdullah along with his oppressed companions wanted to show the enemy that they were not weak and feeble and that they would not just keep bearing the oppression without any resistance. They wanted to let everyone know that even their kids will know how to defend their rights. Gradually it became his routine to throw stones at Indian soldiers along with his friends, and this defiance was the defense of their freedom. Indian propaganda about these stone-throwing lads that they were uneducated, jobless and sold to Pakistani secret services was a baseless lie. Yes, the Kashmiri Muslims loved Pakistan and they faced brutality at the hands of Indian soldiers by even mentioning its name, but they certainly were not paid for their freedom movement from Pakistan. No wise man could imagine such absurd claims. Kashmiris were in no sense like a common citizen of a common state. They had spent their entire childhood and youth under shadows of guns. Thus, now they feared nothing. Worst death meant no fear to them. They aimed for martyrdom, as if they were born to die for freedom. None of them were uneducated or jobless. Their numbers were mostly swelled with university graduates and school students. In addition, many were financially stable and rich. Their real stories were never told to the world by the Indian government. It was a crime to raise voice against those brutalities, and freedom of expression was a sin in Kashmir. Many journalists were tortured on false charges. Kashmir was now a prison, a cage where Indian forces roamed about, terrorizing everyone while the world as well as the Muslim from the nation were silent spectators. Just a few shallow statements here and there, and that was it. Maybe the injustice is only seen and felt when one is a victim oneself. Abdullah grew up in such circumstances. He continued his studies despite all challenges, but he had been a regular visitor of torture cells due to his activities. Sometimes, he was detained for a couple of days, but then there were times when he had been detained for months. Despite all physical and psychological torture, he remained firm and strong. He was still a part of the resisting, stone-throwing group and thus protested for his rights like all of them. Abdullah's hopes were not glued to the leader of any political movement. He knew that was not the caravan of fulfillment. How many of his partners had lost their lives in the movements? Some fell victim to pellet guns and then went blind, but their plea for help was left unheard by every leader. As a result, they were left alone. Abdullah and the youth like him had to fight their battle on their own. He either had hope in the youth like him or in the Kashmiri Islamic fighters. Once while he was in prison he had met an Islamic fighter, and his life literally changed in an instant. Abdullah had found the strongest platform for the greatest struggle of his life. Abdullah could very well remember that day. It was the day when the Indian forces had arrested him again on charges of throwing stones at them. Some young men with him were also caught along with him. When Abdullah arrived at the prison cell, he saw that some Islamic fighters were also imprisoned there. In the prison, Abdullah was tortured for a month. Twice a day he was placed on heaters running on electricity. The current would flow through his veins and would put him out of his senses. The days of his detention were unbelievably terrible. In those days, near his prison cell, there was an Islamic fighter's cell. At night, when the watch was not much strict, he whispered to Abdullah, "Your struggle will not bear fruit until you take part in the fight against Indian oppression for raising the flag of Islam." "What? I thought this is what I'm doing," Abdullah remarked surprisingly. "You're making a big effort, but it is not enough to weaken the enemy. So what shall I do, that our country becomes free from this imprisonment?" He unwillingly remembered the corpse of his father drenched in blood, his mother's and sister's cry, his friends and neighbors' tortured bodies, the missing Kashmiris and those unknown mass graves. He remembered it all at once and his cheeks were soaked with tears. You become an Islamic fighter for the cause of Allah and put your force in fighting for the cause. Help the Islamic fighter fight the Indian army. But before this, you will have to understand the real meaning of holy war. This is a really risky path and on it there is a very fine line between heaven and hell. The slightest slip and everything is over. You have to devise your every move very precisely. His words had a profound influence on Abdullah, and he felt as if he got a direction for his efforts. After leaving the prison, Abdullah began to reflect on God's orders. After arming himself with the weapon of knowledge, he was now fully prepared to be a part of the efforts of the Islamic fighters, of which he was told by his cellmate. A few days before going there, a man delivered to Abdullah a letter by his prison mate which gave the news of his martyrdom. With tears in his eyes and with quivering fingers he opened the letter. It contained a single verse which fueled Abdullah's unalterable and resolute determination. "Dear companion of dungeons and lost victory, don't you forget the days spent in miserable custody." Abdullah enclosed the letter and put it back in his wallet. He had a lot to do today. He performed ablution and went out of his home. After some time Abdullah reached a house near a playground. He was about to enter when a group of children rushed to him. "Brother Abdullah! Brother Abdullah! We missed you a lot." Their voices chanted loud in the ground. The little kids clung to him affectionately. Laughing heartily, Abdullah hugged them one by one. "I missed you all too." He could see the happiness in their eyes. These orphan children were the most important part of his life. Many of the families of his friends and Kashmiris were so very torn. The idea of half-widow was prevalent in Kashmir. These kids reminded him of his friends who left only helpless children behind them. Some got martyred, some became missing persons and some were brutally murdered. Afterwards Indian forces would claim them dead in false encounters, or a number would be added in missing people's list. Abdullah himself was poor, but he tried to save some money for these orphans. He used to eat once in a day and would spend his saved earnings to give to these orphans and their widowed mothers at least a week's ration. He had to beg them to accept his help, as after all, they belonged to self-conscious parents, and thus could not bear a strain on their self-respect. My Lord, my Savior! You took me out of that hell, a hurricane of problems, a tsunami of hardships it was. I remember how long I ran and ran through that path, and itself was a desert of sorrows and pain. Now that I stand in prayers, with my tears rolling down my cheeks, I remember it was the very place I was once humiliated to the limit. How I had cried and screamed for help. How I was about to lose myself and my hope when you turned the tables over. You brought me out of all that with miracles, happening one after the other. Oh my Lord! How can I ever thank you enough? Your love has only increased in this heart of mine. Your remembrance is what my lifeline is now. I came to know of real love at last, pure love, the love for you. How can any beauty delude me now that I have felt the beauty of your love? Do not ever leave me now that I have found you at last. Let my soul be taken away in your cause. Let my blood be spilled in your path, and let my eyes see you when they open up after shutting once. Let me be a martyr like your beloved servant. O Allah! Let me be yours forever. Diary of a prisoner, a bleeding soul.